Hello and welcome to the Dr. Kirsten Show. I am your host, Dr. Kirsten Lauritsen, and today I have Hunter Schurrer with me today. Welcome. Start there.
Thank you. It is amazing to be here. It's amazing to talk and see you.
Yes, same. Hunter, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do and how you got here.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll do that in 30 seconds. No, it's it's amazing to be on. Really looking forward to talking today. But yeah, like Tristan said, my name is Hunter Schurrer. I'm a strength and conditioning coach. Recently integrative health coach as well, which I've fallen in love with in regards to really like having the conversation. I think it's a skill that all coaches and personal trainers and people in that world should have. Side tangent. But no, background is all in strength and conditioning. I'm down now. I work for an organization known as the University of Health and Performance, in which we focus on creating coaches and professionals in the health and wellness space, whether they're active duty or transitioning out. Came to the role. I love coaching. Health and fitness and training has been like something that has given so much to me. And so to take two worlds and put them together, it made a lot of sense and brought me to Northwest Arkansas. Prior to that, I was up at 1st Special Forces Group. For those that aren't aware, Special Forces are the Green Berets. A lot of time that term Special Forces gets thrown around a lot, and people have a tendency to misunderstand what that is.
Sure.
So worked with Special Forces for over a decade and loved it. Fell in love with the military and the tactical community. My background prior to that was college athletics. Worked at the University of Virginia, University of Wyoming. But once I really got to the military side of things, I loved it. Not that I didn't love working with my athletes, but no offense, I didn't care as much as far as preparing people for a game or going on to the next level as I did getting to know guys and gals. How can they stay healthy? How can they perform their jobs to get home to families and just live life? So, yeah, I mean, background is I enjoyed the process. I enjoyed training. Was an athlete growing up through the discus and hammer in college, but I fell in love with the process. I fell in love with the training, and that took me on to grad school and all the things. And fast forward, hate to say it, almost 20 years later, which is still crazy to say that I've been doing it that long, which makes me feel old. But here I am, and it's been amazing, and I still feel like I'm 25 years old. So all good.
Well, you get to feel like you're 25 years old, but you have all of the wisdom and the time spent of having been in it for 20 years,
Yeah.
which is the benefit of time. That's what I
It
would
is,
say.
yeah. It is. It's like I try to tell myself that I'm still 25. I still get little reminders here and there,
Yeah.
physically in life that I'm not. But yeah, it's still very fortunate to be able to do a lot of things at a high level, and it's what I love about training and working with people and all that is because I think people have so much more that they're capable of than they even realize.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I see that time and time again, right?
Mhm.
And not only in my own life, but in other people's as
Yeah.
well. But this is a great segue into what I thought would be a really great conversation to have today, which is just training in your 30s and beyond. Because
Hmm.
not only on just out of the many people that I have seen and worked with, things shift when you get into your 30s. It doesn't matter if you're male, female, like things just change.
Yeah.
So, what are some of let's just start off with some basics. How about that?
Yep.
Start off with some basics. What are some of the changes that tend to happen, and what are some things that you um, consistently see as ways that you coach people through? How do we shift our training in our 30s
Yeah,
and
I
beyond?
think, yeah, no, it's great. I think the biggest piece is always meeting ourselves where we're at.
Mm.
And I know that sounds really good on paper and it can be a little cliche at times, but I think it's a cliche for a reason because so much of the time we have a tendency to compare ourselves to our younger version.
Oh,
Or like, I used to
yes.
run X amount of distance, or I used to lift X amount of weight. And so I go into the gym and everybody goes full send. And they're like, I'm going to run, I'm going to do this. And then they, wake up the following day and they're so sore or tired or beat up or an injury happens.
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, I can't do what I did when I was younger, opposed to looking at, well, what was the layoff? What has life been like? What has your exercise training and everything been leading up to that point? of when those things that happen. So I think first and foremost is recognizing not that it's an age thing, but there's usually, I think, a gap, whether
Mm,
it's a layoff, whether there was an injury that we're coming back from, whether it's habits, ways of life, or whatever it is. I think age and time is the ultimate factor, but I don't think it's necessarily how old we are. It's just the time in which we've done, whatever specific activities.
sure. Isn't it interesting how we go from that like our mindset or our brain goes to like the far end of like, oh, it must be that I'm just getting older. Therefore, this is just not for me anymore. I saw this all the time being a chiropractor for a bit. Like I would see
Hmm.
weekend warriors all the time. They'd be like, "Oh yeah, I went out and played beach volleyball on Saturday, and here I am on Monday and my back is a mess," right? And then they kind of
Yeah.
like they say, and I heard this and still continue to hear this often, which is like, "Oh, it just must be that I'm getting older." And I would constantly be like, "No," like, yes and no, but no, because like because let's take it a step back and realize like it's not necessarily about the getting older. It's about the fact that like you did the weekend warrior thing and aren't doing anything else in the middle of your week or anything else to prepare for that. So it's a funny jump or leap that we tend to do. And I'm personally like just coming off of pregnancy and all that stuff, like trying to figure out how fitness is going to fit back in. And it's funny you say that because I was like, oh, I think I commented on one of your posts. Like I consistently am like, okay, yeah, not me going out to run like a full mile, like
Yep.
full send
Yeah.
when I was able to run like more than 26 miles. But it's funny how we want to jump in from where we were and realizing that sometimes doesn't really work, but oftentimes doesn't work.
Yeah. The ego is a son of a gun. It's sneaky and it wants us to create these stories and buy in that, well, it wouldn't be anything to do with me. It just must be because I'm older. And
Right.
it's honestly, it's a way, I think, not to go too psychological, but it's accountability. And if I
Yeah.
say it's because I'm older, then I don't have to take accountability for how I've lived my life,
Yep.
nutrition, movement, all those things. And so it's
Hmm.
really easy to blame age because I think it's socially acceptable. It's
Yeah.
easy to say, yeah, it's because we're older and look at all the other people around me that are my age, or I'm doing better than them, or we get caught in this comparison game. So
Yep.
I think age becomes that scapegoat.
There's more evidence for those beliefs than there is not. And so we can definitely find those if we just barely even look for them than like the ones that are the outliers, I would say, or the
Yeah.
different way of doing it for sure. And we can go as mindset psychological as you want. My people are like all
Love it.
about the subconscious mind.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I'm all for it.
yes, but let's try and stay a little bit in like the physical how-tos, things people
Hmm.
can do. So um you mentioned as far as like on like layoffs or like just taking time off or just we haven't necessarily had consistency in like training and the things that we do. What are
Yep.
some of the ways that you suggest or would recommend people start that or start chipping away at that? Is that
Yeah,
yeah.
chipping away
Hmm.
works great, beautifully.
Yeah.
From the standpoint, like going back to meeting ourselves where we're at.
Hmm.
Okay, so what is the smallest step that you can take and move forward that to me like doesn't throw off life? So if it is going back to you running, yes, you have done an Ironman. And so as you train up, if you were to do one again, what does that look like? Okay, well, when was the last time you were on a bike? So, okay, and when that happened,
Hmm.
how long did you ride? It might just be like, okay, we're not even going to worry about distance. Or if we are, what is the smallest amount that we could do that would not create soreness, that would not throw off, that would allow me to ride the following day? And so running, lifting, like what is the smallest? And sometimes that, again, going to the mental side, ties into the physical. It's the hardest part because we know that we are capable of so much more. And talking about it from like that training perspective of
Hmm.
how can I train for tomorrow, not
Yeah.
today. Like learning from the military was the hardest thing we got when we got on the ground was guys wanted to smoke themselves. Like they knew that they were capable of doing more, but they would crush themselves on Monday and they would be so beat up, so sore, and then they might be able to come back in on Thursday. And so being able to build the work capacity, I'm like, okay, well, let's take your 9 down to like a 4 and let's show that we can put day after day in at that 4. Okay, cool. Now that we've established this baseline, now let's look to bring that up. And so the smallest steps that people can make, and
Yeah.
it comes down to the sport, comes down to the movement, but literally, like, go back, when was the last time you did it, how hard was the effort, and then how do we just take those minuscule steps, to your point, like literally chipping away so we know where we want to go.
Mhm. I find that's a benefit on, and I will say this, to having a coach for sure, whether you have done it before or whether you have, or this is like the first time that you're starting to
Hmm.
figure out like, what do I do? Because I've never really done this before. Having a coach is so helpful because, like, as you mentioned, like it helps you stay accountable. Like they're able to help you actually dial back to where you want, like where you probably should be starting.
Hmm.
That, and then, even still, like if I were to go back, what, and I'm not even sure really what what my goals are moving forward yet. I'm still trying to
Hmm.
figure that out.
Uh-huh.
But um I even though I know what that all looked like and I know where to start, having a coach still is like one of the best ways to like actually make sure that you do it.
It
Like,
is, yeah. I mean,
I don't know.
yeah, to your point, that coach is more than like, here's the program. Anybody
Yeah.
can get a program. All of us
Mhm.
anymore, especially in the age of information, could literally Google, build up program, whatever it is. But who's
Mhm.
guiding you? Who's holding you accountable? Who is tailoring it to you in your life? It's one thing to try to plug a program into you compared to, excuse me, flipping that, plugging you into a program compared to building that program around you.
Mhm.
And that's even myself. Like, if I'm really wanting to do something, I would much rather hand it over to somebody else, because my own biases, my own voices, my
Oh
own
yeah.
ego's going to chip in. Okay, you really like doing this stuff. Let's put that on paper because you love that. Oh, you
Mm.
hate doing that. Well, it's not that big of a deal if we don't do it. And you
Mhm.
can play that game all day, opposed to just, here's where I want to go. You're a subject matter expert, somebody I trust. Like, and now how do we work back into that?
Yeah, I used to have to make sure that I didn't look at the work. Well, actually, this was different for triathlon training than like in CrossFit, but like when I would go to the CrossFit gym, I would try really hard not to look at what the workout was because I would 100% skip any thruster days that were on the board. Like
Yeah.
I would not show up.
I mean, we
Wall
saw
balls,
that.
no.
Yeah, we saw that with, as much as I hate to say it, we saw that with the Green Berets. We'd have days that were more conditioning dominant days, and they're like, "We need more conditioning. We need more conditioning." But then the conditioning days come, and nobody's coming in for it,
Yeah,
and they're
isn't that
like,
funny?
"Yeah." So it's, yeah,
We know what we
it's not,
need,
it's a
but then we're
universal
like,
factor.
nah. Not showing up. I don't want to do it. Okay. Let's see. Strength and conditioning. So, what are
Hmm.
some so I know that I have a lot of people who are looking for ways that they can improve strength, weightlifting, strength and conditioning is like a really big kind of gap, I would say,
Yep.
because I have a lot of endurance people in my world. So, what are some what are some things you find as far as maybe like myths around strength and conditioning or things that like well I know that people know the importance of strength and conditioning,
Hmm.
but what is something that you would say as far as why it's really helpful and important to be focusing on strength?
It's the underlying factor for everything that we do. Even if you're an endurance athlete, if you are stronger, you can operate to some extent at a lower percentage, whether that's wattage or power on a bike, whether that is increasing your stride length. A little bit can go a really long ways, as well as addressing some imbalances. And so making sure that you are strong enough to be able to do X. And then it fills in the gaps of the things that you are not doing. So if you are working with people that are traditionally not strength trained or strength athletes, they're doing all the endurance work potentially in the world. Bringing that strength back is just going to allow them to be able to express that endurance all the more easily.
Hmm.
And so, but then again, making sure that we understand that we're pulling from that same recovery pot. Don't just take a strength program and throw it into an endurance program. The two need to like work together, and they need to complement each other. And a lot of times we don't. They're like, okay, here's my running program. I'm going to do this. I was not doing any strength training at all. And now I just added all the strength training. Now my running hurts. Okay, because it must be the strength training that's making me that, opposed to making sure the two fit together.
Hmm.
You're
Hmm.
making faces as far as this
Hmm.
sounds like it. Is this hitting home or a little too
Yes.
close? Or
Oh no, no. This is like I see it all the time, and
yeah.
I'm even thinking of it too from more of like The thing that I start thinking about when we're putting too much load onto the human body, we are,
Yep.
and it's just I'm so glad that you put it like that. Like when you're pulling from the recovery pot, that's such a great way to put it, because like this is kind of where I see athletes overtrain and get into that overtraining spot. So you mentioned like starting to like running must be the thing that, or the strength training must be the thing that's causing the pain
Yep.
when running starts to hurt. It's not really that. It's the fact that like the body is just trying to like recover and adapt and do what it needs to do to mop up all that inflammation, but it like can't do it if you're just putting more strain and stress on an already overloaded system.
Yeah.
So I just really appreciate the way you said that. It's there, it's incorporating it all. And I think that's the thing that I see so much too, is like that we've got the like triathlon or the endurance, like, oh, I need to go run for a certain, they've got that program, but then trying to fit a mismatched
Hmm.
strength training program on top of it just doesn't
Yep.
flow. It just doesn't. And then you end up
Yeah.
not doing it, and then it doesn't help.
Yeah, it's, I mean, then the strength training or whatever it is, there, I mean, there's always a scapegoat. There's always a reason for something. And so
Yeah.
going back to that recovery pot, I mean, you could say that my running program doesn't work when it actually might be the fact that, if you're a new mom and you are not getting any sleep. Well, my running program stinks. That's why it is. Has nothing to do with the sleep, has nothing to do with why I'm under recover. Like to your point, like allostatic load and stress is stress.
Right.
I mean, it's why athletic teams and people go to training camps. So it's like, how do we decrease all the other stress so we can focus on, the training stress?
Right.
And so all of that, life, mental, emotional, physical, whether it's physical endurance, physical strength, it all pulls from that same pot. And so, like being a younger coach, the joke was like, there's no such thing as overtraining, just under eating
Oh
and under
yeah.
sleeping.
Mm.
And it's funny, but to some extent, if you're getting plenty of sleep and your nutrition's on point, it just makes it that much harder. Doesn't mean you
Yeah.
can't do it, but it's all connected.
Yep, yep, yep. It's funny, like, or it's not funny. I think I was just reflecting on this the other day that like, and you've actually done some testing, as far as like some of the functional labs and functional testing goes. But like one of the things that I realized was that all of that is really helpful to have, and like that's really beneficial information to have. But what we really also need to make sure of is that we have that foundation of like nutrition and exercise and sleep, like if you, and hydration, like if you have
Hmm.
those things, and I should also say maybe like stress management, so if you have those like
Yeah.
4 or 5 things pretty dialed in, then like everything kind of circles around that. It's like
Hmm.
you can do all the fancy things, but it is really really critical that we also know how to manage all of those bits and pieces.
Yeah.
And that's, to like again to your point, like that's that recovery pot. If one of those factors are off for whatever reason, I think where I see a lot of people also tend to kind of get caught up is that they don't adjust accordingly, like their other
Hmm.
stuff, right? So like
Yep.
let's say, and we actually, you mentioned this right before we started this call, but like yes, we have all this data as far as like what everything in health wise should look when we're in our 30s or beyond, but like when life happens, then what?
Yeah.
So like when we have a lot of, let's say, work stress or life stress happens, and we don't dial back like some of the exercise or training, or we don't dial back some of the other areas, we just keep
Hmm.
adding more load. That's oftentimes when I see people start to kind of break a bit. Like we
Yeah.
start to see some things not go the way we want them to. What do you I don't know if this is even but what do you usually suggest when you see that, right? Like how can we what does training in your 30s, or what does this and beyond really look like when life happens? How do we, adjust for that?
Yeah. No, it's beautiful. I mean, you talked about doing like the foundational pieces. I mean, if we look at like old school, like if everybody remembers like Maslow's hierarchy of needs in
Yeah.
regards to like,
Yeah, yeah,
but if
yeah.
we compare that to recovery, like sleep, nutrition, And obviously all the cool stuff nowadays, everybody's got percussion therapy and cold plunges. I don't know about anybody else's social media, but cold plunge and everybody else is all over mine. It's
Yeah.
cool, but it doesn't make up for the other stuff. And
Yeah,
so I think
it doesn't. You're right. Yeah. Hmm.
going back to what's it like when we're in our 30s, the easiest way I've always compared or looked at it is the intensity of the things that you do is like the ingredient. And so if you want to get stronger, you have to train heavy. If you want to get better endurance, you have to do longer duration exercise. If you, whatever it may be. And so we know that there's physical responses to, certain training effects. And so then the amount, the volume at which we do is the amount of that ingredient. So let's say you're somebody that wants to get strong, but you know that you are under rested, underfed, like life is just beating you down, but you want to maintain strength, opposed to some younger athlete who could maybe handle for, 5 sets of three that's heavy. You might only get 1 to 2 sets at most. In other words, so we're still doing the same ingredient, we're still touching intensity, but we're not doing a lot of it. Touch it, and that's all we get because the volume is truly what's going to really put a lot of stress on the system. And so we want to maintain all these physical characteristics depending on who we are, what we're doing. So we need to touch those certain ingredients. We can still do that, but how much we do is going to be based off that ability to recover. And as we get older, if we have more life, everybody's different.
Hmm.
If you have kids at 35 and you're married and you have all these other things, is very different than a professional athlete who's 35, who has everything, all the money, all the resources. And to compare those two people is not fair.
Yep.
And so it's like you could still do the heavy intensity CrossFit class, but you might only get 2 to 3 classes of those as a week. And maybe you need to do just longer, slower duration, or just it comes down to modifying the total volume, I think, more than the actual training response or the intensity, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Hmm. I really appreciate that you kind of link those two together because I do often feel like I see a lot of people expecting that their results are going to look the way that like the person who's able to put all the time in the world is going to look like, and how long or short it's going to take them to get those
Yeah.
results, but then not really accounting for all of the other things that they have on their plate that are not on that other person's plate. Like I think back to like when I trained in my 20s, like I went to the
Hmm.
gym like a bookend of my work days because I could. I woke up and I went to the 5 a.m. one and then I like class and then I would go and I'd go to the 4 p.m. one. And like
Yeah.
that was a great time. But like me being able to do that now, not necessarily gonna happen. And I think being
Correct.
realistic with that, though it's funny, I do sometimes like feel like I would love to go back to that time
Yeah.
of how I used to feel. But I don't know. I think it's really important to kind of highlight those different experiences and those life things that happen there.
Yeah, it's from the age. I mean, we've talked about age a little bit, and it's not always necessarily biological age. It's
Hmm.
training age. So
Hmm.
if you're 35 and you have no experience and you're just getting into, whether it's CrossFit or endurance training or strength training, is very different to compare yourself to anybody else. And it's comparison's tough.
Yeah,
It's really tough.
really
Um,
tough. Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, that's the yep. Comparisons like literally, it's funny that we do it too, right? Like it doesn't matter really where you're at, but it's so common and so easy to start comparing to other people and where they
Hmm.
where they are. Um, Gosh, man, I see it even all the time in like the moms groups, everybody comparing and like looking for advice, but like also comparing themselves to everybody else,
Yeah.
like, oh, this is just, don't do it. You're just an entirely different, unique person. Like you're going to have your own way of doing things. And we can use the basics of like what we know, but also like, let's not compare our life and our results to somebody else and what they have been able
Yeah.
to achieve. Um, okay, let's see. Coming back from injuries.
Hmm.
Hmm. No, we talked a little
Yeah.
bit about like starting where to start as far as starting from scratch or starting from a place that is conducive. But what about what is different, I would say, than like just anybody who maybe isn't experiencing an injury, and starting to get back into it, what's different between that to like when we're trying to come back from an injury?
I mean, like anything else, there's obviously multiple layers to that. What's the severity? How long is the layoff? And man, the amount of factors that go into it, and then the activity that we're trying to do. So even if I haven't been injured,
Hmm.
you look at people that are like, well, I go to the gym every day, I lift weights, and then I play basketball, I get hurt. I've been active, but comparing the two is, I mean, if you train like a bodybuilder and then you try to move like a basketball player, you haven't been doing X amount. And so just understanding that whatever activity that you want to do, going back to, okay, what activities have you been doing that resembles what you want to do?
Yeah.
And so then it's kind of working its way backwards. If you're jumping, if you're running, basketball being the example. If you're not, okay, well, we know you're lifting weights, so you're doing some sort of strength work, force work, it's movement, it's better than nothing. Um, but then it goes to the layoff piece, and not just that's where I think that training age comes back into sight, because it can kind of reset things from the standpoint is like I had a bad foot injury.
Mm.
Man, it'd be almost 15 years ago, in which multiple screws in and out, multiple surgeries, complete non-weight bearing for weeks, then walking boot, then restarting the process. I mean, so it was literally a year long. So if we look at like what then
Mm.
became the training age of my foot, I had to start with, okay, can I walk? Once I walk, can I start to do this? Okay, cool. I can do that in this plane, like sagittal plane, front to back. What's my movement? Just so then we're looking at intensities, movements, speed within those movements. I mean, man, the age old like coaching answer of it depends is really hard, because
Yeah.
it's people think it's a cop out of an answer. Like, hey, what about this and this? It depends, because there's so many factors that can go in. And so really being honest, where are you at? Where do you
Hmm.
want to go? And then what is required of getting there, whether that's been 3 weeks, 6 months, 3 years, or even people that are like, I'm not injured, but I haven't run in 20 years and I want to start to run. And like, that's something that whatever, drives them to do so.
Yeah.
So being really honest on where you're at, where you want to go, and then what are the characteristics that you need for that? And then slowly going back to that, like chipping away. Okay, we know that there's going to have to be some stability work through the joint. We know that there's going to be have some force absorption creation, like, and then start to piece things together from a program perspective from that.
Hmm. This is going to lead into my next question. And that is around like resistance that people have. I just want
Mm-hmm.
to highlight again, like to the people listening, as far as like having a coach, why it's so beneficial and so helpful to have one is that when you are, I think oftentimes we do face a lot of resistance when we're like, okay, but like, what do I do? Like, what do I actually do? Like, okay, so I hurt my foot for per your example. Like, how
Yep.
do I actually start running again? How do I start building strength back? What sort of movements do I do? And it creates all sorts of resistance. And sorry, what I realized a lot with when I was working, especially on the chiropractic side, was that people were causing themselves a lot of resistance because they felt like they didn't know enough in order to do it safely, in order to do it in a way that
Mm-hmm.
they felt comfortable in doing that, and then they just wouldn't do it. They
Yeah.
just wouldn't get back into training, and felt like there was something wrong with them in that sense that like they just didn't know enough or how to do it. And in reality, what they really needed was just having some support with someone who was like able to walk them through the steps of getting back into whatever it was that they wanted to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Going
Hmm.
back to it, I mean, the ego is a son of a gun. It wants to keep
Hmm.
us safe. It wants to keep us in comfort zones.
Yeah.
And so from there, yes, like people have a tendency to stop, and that's where we blame the age thing. I'm just old now, and that's the way it is.
Hmm.
But really just being honest, I'm like, what is going back to that incremental? What's a little bit more that I can do today? Is it what I want to do? No. Is it better than it was yesterday? Cliches and all the motivational things on Instagram or whatever, like 1% better a day. Yeah, that's it. I
Yeah.
know that it's now just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy, but get that guidance from anybody that you can find, and then slowly start to build back those things. So if you're like, where do I start? Okay, first, know where you're at. If you haven't run, what does running look like? I haven't run ever past this time. Cool. Let's start with literally, can you jog to the end of the driveway? 10 yards. That's awesome. You just ran further than you ever have. Now let's walk, the rest of the mile or whatever that may be and start looping, excuse me, not looping, but tying those pieces together. And so I
Hmm.
think that kind of answers that, but
Yeah.
man, it's just like, it depends. It's
Hmm.
like start where you're at, know where you're at and be honest where you're at. And
Yeah.
then going back to that recovery pot, what can you recover from? Because it's one thing to be like, man, I know I'm going to be a little sore, but if you're a mom, if you're a parent, if you're whatever it is, you can't just be like, you can't break yourself off and be like, oh, it's a big leg day in the gym, but yeah, you still have to take care of the kids. You got to go to work. You got to do all these things. And so it's like, what's the minimal dosage effect is something I'm a really big fan of. What's the least amount of work that we
Mm,
can do to move the needle, to make sure we don't put too much stress on the system that life is going to give us. And yeah, start to build from there, but be honest where
love
we're
that.
at to start.
Yeah. Minimal dosage. I like that. It's the minimum amount and then go from there. Okay. Anything else that you see as like common resistance? We've covered actually a lot, I think, as
Hmm.
far as like in all the little bits and pieces, but any other things that you commonly see as far as resistance to getting into strength and conditioning or just training in general, that we should touch on? Anything
I
else?
mean, yeah, the too much too fast is always going to be the thing.
Okay.
It's and then thinking or going like to the comparison point of like, this is who this person is, this is what they do, that's what I should do,
Mhm.
compared to like, what did they do to get here? And looking at all of that stuff. So go back to the starting point, then build up to where they're at, opposed to that's where they are, that's what I want to do. So I'll do the same thing and
Mhm.
kind of earning that right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's always the biggest thing. Like, but to your point, like the minimal dosage effect, like it stuck with me. Like water boils 212 degrees. It doesn't become more boiled at 213. And so if I don't have to do more, why would I do more? But not to
Mhm.
go off on like a rant, like this is America. So we're going to do more. When in doubt, I'm going to work harder. I'm going to do more. I'm just going to do more. I'm going to do more. I'm going to do more, opposed to maybe I don't need to do more. Maybe less is more, and focusing on doing the right things compared to just doing more work.
Hmm. You wouldn't say. Oh man, I feel like that's been such a big deconditioning point
Yeah.
of my journey over the last couple years. It's like I know that I have a lot of people who would qualify or classify themselves as like high performers and high achievers, and that is like one of the things is like really just piling on more and more and more and more and more.
Yeah.
Um, Thinking that like by doing more, we're going to actually achieve or get where we want to go, when in fact, what ends up happening is that we just end up literally like burying ourselves into the ground and then
Yep.
wondering like, how the heck did we get here?
Yeah.
What
Yeah, we
happened?
can. It's true. I think and it's because I've done the same. Like it got posed to me from a mentor when I was in grad school. He said, if you could get the same response from training, only lifting 3 days a week, opposed to I think I was lifting 5 or 6, would you? And I know for some people that's like, of course, why would you not? But I love training. Like I loved going in the weight room. I loved doing
Yep.
all that. And for me, like now I don't get to do what I love and I could do the same thing. So I think so many of us, but it comes out of like this almost like a scarcity or a fear mentality of like, if I don't do as much as I can, then I'm not doing enough.
Yes.
And I think that's a really good mentality to have, that you're willing to do that,
Hmm.
but realizing that if going back to our lives now, if family, stress, work, like that's not who we were when we were 20 years old.
Yeah.
And so being able to handle the stresses of like 2 classes or 2 training sessions a day or being in the gym for like 3 hours straight,
Yeah.
um, we just can't get away with that because we have more of this allostatic, this other stress outside of the physical, and we need to account for that.
Yeah.
And so really making sure that that is taken care of. And if like we don't have to do more, let's not, so we can really put it in to the family and the life and all the other stuff. It'll actually make both better compared to being shot from the gym, doing too much. Now I come home and I'm so fried that like trying to deal with anything puts me over the edge, and they just,
Hmm.
it snowballs.
Right, right. One that's gosh, I would say that's one of the most common reasons why I see people doing all of the things and doing so much, but like not getting the results that they're looking for. Is
Yeah,
because they're just doing so much. And then they're like literally terrified of what it looks like to do less because then they're afraid that like they're not going to get the result that they want.
yeah.
Whether that's weight loss or
It's
muscle gain or like whatever it is, that's just it's wild to me like how many people are just doing so much. And then when they hear do less, they're like, um,
yeah.
how?
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard. It is
Yeah,
really
it's
hard to be
super hard.
told like, if you do less, you'll get more out of it. And they're like, that doesn't make sense.
No.
Like the
Mm-mm.
math doesn't math on that. So
That
it's just
I
like,
literally was like that. I was like, I don't
yeah,
get it.
same. And it's the best analogy I kind of heard lately is like, if you think about, if you take the same amount of light and you hit a disco ball with it, that disco ball is going to reflect and it's going to go in all these different directions. But if you take that light, you put it through a magnifying glass, and it is going to focus that light on exactly what you want to do. And I think opposed to us thinking like, I just need to give it more light, focusing really on like, what's the change? What is whatever we want to do? Focus on that. It won't even require as much, and we're going to get so much more out of our training than we would opposed to just piling all this extra stuff on. And now we're just tired.
So good. So good. That's a great metaphor.
Yeah.
I might borrow
I,
that
I
one.
can't take credit. I can't take credit. I'll tell you who it's from afterwards, but
Okay.
I can't take credit for it. But I heard that. I'm like, that is
Okay.
beautiful. And they're like, I just made that up. I'm like, good
Okay.
job. That's awesome.
It's a great
But
metaphor.
yeah,
I'll borrow that one. Um, yeah, and gosh, I mean, how many times have I done that? As far as
mhm.
like shining the light on the disco ball. Wild. Okay, I am loving this. Is there anything else that you feel like you would love to add to this conversation that we haven't touched on?
I mean, I feel like we could do this for another 2 hours
I
because there's
know.
so many fun tangents to
Yes.
go off of.
Yes.
But no, I mean, the biggest thing, eh, to recommend for people is less can be more.
Yeah.
I would much more recommend. That's really
Much
good
more
English.
recommend.
But like,
It's
as
okay.
far as, but no, like, opposed to doing more, like, I would much rather see people live either at really high highs or actually recover on the lows. So if you're going to do something, do it. Don't just like live in this middle tired ground of wearing yourself out and it's not enough stimulus to create a response. Make sure that you can get to, and then on the flip side of that, go low enough to where you're truly recovering from that.
Hmm.
And so I think that's just, but it goes back to that more mentality, because if we live in like this middle ground, we can just do more work. It's
Yep.
like we try to, like, not to go off on again, but like
No,
I can
please.
multitask. And so I'll work on my phone and I'll work on work and I'll have the TV on. Well, you're not doing great at any of it. And I think that's what we do with our training. I'll do a little running, I'll do a little lifting, I'll do it like, man, make it laser.
Yep.
Focus in on whatever it is you're going to do, get the most out of it, and then recover. Get the most out of your run later, recover from it, opposed to just, not that junk miles. And I don't, that's not a bad thing, but sometimes depending on what it is, that time is needed. But like, make the training count. Don't just do more for more sake.
Oh yeah. I mean, actually, just like my triathlon coach taught me a lot about that. It's
Mm-hmm.
like there was a point and a reason to literally everything that I did. So whether I
Yeah,
was running or walking, like if I was doing a certain number of miles, it was to get literally miles on the feet. Like that was the
yep,
point. Or sometimes it would be something else to like build sprints and to build, something else. But like there was never, and he would also get on top of me too when I was like doing other things outside of that. He'd
yeah,
be like, more is not better.
correct.
This is not the point.
Yeah,
So, um,
it's
and
true. It's
anyway, it's a good point.
Yeah, we saw that with, the Green Berets that we worked at group, the guys that really loved to train, they wanted to do more. So we'd get done with the
Yep.
training session that might be 75 minutes long, and then they would come in later in the day and they're like, "Oh, I want to do more of this." And they would just break themselves off. And it's like, one, we don't need it. And two, now we don't even know what's working. because it's like you're doing so much of this. We don't know if it's the training, we don't know if it's life, we don't know if it's stress. So it kind of throws off the experiment, so to speak, to really understand and to adjust training to people. And so, but
Yeah.
we get that voice in the back of our head, like, I can do more, I need to do more. If I do more, I'll get better, I'll improve faster. And
Hmm.
there's a fine line with it.
I won't take us on this tangent, but I do want to say that this is one of the ways, though, that I see so often that athletics applies to so many different areas of our lives, like including business and all these other places. Like,
Hmm.
um, by just everything you just said there, like those are things that aren't just like, oh gosh, I could go on another
Hmm.
complete tangent with this podcast, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's just I've been really looking at like what are some of the things that we do and that we learn and that we know inside of like sports and athletics and fitness that those lessons apply everywhere. And that's definitely one of them. It's pretty cool. Hmm.
Yeah, it's the biggest takeaway I think for me as I've gotten older is it goes back to just the simplicity of like keep the goal the goal. Why are you training in the first place?
Yeah.
And so if you're going back to training for an Ironman, why would you do strength training for it? We want to make sure that it is benefiting and not taking away from it. If you're training as we get older, if you're not trying to make an Olympic team or whatever it is, like, why are you breaking yourself off in the gym? If you want to train to, like, I talk to so many people, like, I want to be able to keep up with my kids,
Yeah.
but then they break themselves off in the gym because it's all they know how to do. I don't blame them for it. And I'm like, you're so sore. You can't play with your kids right now. And so, like, your why is all like, and I don't
Hmm.
fault people for it because we go back to what we know,
Hmm.
but keep the why the why. And is what you are doing truly helping, like, why you're training in the first place? And if it's not, find somebody who knows how to do that, help you with that. Or, if you're like, dude, I can figure it out myself, make sure that it works out to help you.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Okay, well, as most of my conversations end, I'm like, yep, we'll have you on again for sure, because there's
Love it.
definitely more to dive into. So on that note, for anyone listening that has some follow-up questions, you can find Hunter on social media. I'll have his link, all of his links in the comment or the whatever, the section below. You guys know where to find it. And then also I will have you can come over and chat with me or even just drop a comment, especially if like you're watching on YouTube or whatever, any questions you have, and then we'll collect all of them and then we'll create a follow-up. So Hunter,
Awesome.
thank you. Thank you for being on and sharing all
Yeah.
of your wisdom.
I appreciate it. It's always fun to talk. It's like we found out like we could do this all night. It'd be a great
Mm-hmm.
night.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that's what we should do sometime is like you, Tia, and I, we just turn the cameras on and we just like have a conversation and just see where it leads. Like I think that actually would be really fun
It's good. I'm always down.
later this year when we're all maybe in the same room together.
Yeah, I fully support
That
it.
would be so fun. Okay. All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching and we'll see you next week with the next episode. Take care.